Hey, this is Pamela Schneider. I'm the retail editor for Blue Book Services, and this is the Produce Reporter Week in Review. Greg, we haven't talked about inflation in a while. Let's talk about inflation.
Once a month, the Bureau of Labor sends out its inflation numbers, and I guess the good news is inflation is slowing. It's only about 3% above a year ago, and food is closer to 5% above a year ago. And fresh produce actually does pretty well in that. It's just under 3% compared to a year ago, with vegetables a little bit higher than fruit, and they remain way lower than canned and frozen. Canned is 7% above a year ago, and frozen almost 12. So I guess that's the good news. The bad news is it's still up every month, and it compounds, and consumers feel it. And you can say it's only up 0.3% over June, but that's every month, and this is the slow time.
And you know what? I feel like every time that somebody tells me the inflation's only 3% or whatever, or 5%, I feel like they're gaslighting me, because I know that's not it. I know that's not true, because they're talking about compared to last year. And we're talking about, like, my brain is telling me when I go into the store and I've got shrinkflationed chocolate milk and things like that, it's not comparing to 2019, right? The before times is what we're going to call it, right?
Right.
Because it's more like 25-30%. And to have them tell me, oh, inflation's only 5%, like, no, it's not. I'm not stupid.
No. And that gets to our other story, which we ran the release a week or two ago, that the Dunnhumby report survey about food insecurity. And one of the things that we didn't really talk about in there, but Richard in his column this week did a little bit, it found that the consumers' perceived rate of inflation is 22.6%, whereas at this time of the survey, year-over-year inflation was 7.1. And a lot of people will say, well, consumers perceive it wrong. But just like you're saying, we're perceiving it. We're not thinking about July last year. We're thinking about before. And before, it was a lot cheaper. And most consumers feel like before it was a lot cheaper, and they're not putting a date on it. So the perceived inflation, that's what the retailers and marketers and restaurants, that's what they have to address.
Right. And this other thing that Richard pulled out was a Dunnhumby news release that said that 36% of families report skipping a meal to save money. And that is a better indicator than a 5% year-over-year increase in inflation. Somebody skipping meals takes me back to my childhood, honestly. I grew up in the Ozarks, and we had buttered noodles for dinner more often than I care to remember. But that isn't just like a sad fact. That's also something that is really bad for produce. Because if people are skipping meals, what are they skipping?
Yeah, they're replacing it with a candy bar or a bag of chips. They're
Or a
probably not
protein
skipping
bar.
meals and having an apple instead.
No.
I mean, if you're having trouble making ends meet, you're buying the cheapest food you can get, and that's calories per cent, and produce has to compete with that, and our products are higher quality and higher price.
And it disproportionately affects people that lack skills, lack time, lack motivation. And it says that as high as 72% of people would have difficulty covering an unexpected expense of $400. People are skipping meals. The age group of 18 to 44 are the hardest hit in terms of financial and food insecurity. So fresh out of high school up until young parents are the ones that are skipping the most meals. And the 36% figure is for families with children. And so I'm guessing that the kids are eating and mom and dad aren't. And the percentage was slightly lower overall. So it's higher than the rest of the country. The rest of the country is 30%. Anyway, anyone skipping a meal because they can't afford it, it's going to hurt the produce industry. It hurts people. It hurts our overall health and nutrition. And it's a better indicator of inflation, I think, than our monthly Bureau of Labor Statistics report. I had a better word for it, but I used that last week. So
well, it also gets to real income, which is not a produce issue. It's an overall issue, but it's hitting the middle class harder. I mean, most people are experiencing higher inflation than they are wage increases, which means lower buying power. And at the same time, most people are still, I mean, there are some skipping meals. Most people are skipping other things instead of meals. And I think we're going to, the last year people have been saying, hey, it's not as bad as it was before, but it's all cumulative. And I think we're going to start seeing more of that by the end of this year. I mean, like part of the BLM thing was that gas prices were down 10% over a year ago. I was like, that cannot be. So I looked it up, and sure enough, like last May was the height where average gasoline prices were like over $4. But it's still really high. And it's like the average rate is like $3.80 a gallon. And we want to compare it to 2020 when it was $2.10.
Yeah, and when there was no demand for gas, the demand was super low. Prices were super
low. That was
low.
actually only for like 2 months.
True.
And then it went down, and then it went right back. I mean, it started growing again once demand increased. But all right, so take January 2020. I mean, it was like 215, 220 a gallon. So that's what is in our mind. It's not versus a year ago. Hey, it's 10 cents lower than a year ago. It's been high.
Yeah, mine is still under $3 a gallon, which I think living where I do, I guess, it makes it a little bit more a little easier to manage. Although, talk to me about property taxes later.
Texas is one of the lowest price gas states. Missouri used to be that, and then it's kind of bummer, man. But yeah, I mean, you can guess which the highest are.
My grandpa used to drive from Kansas City, Kansas to Kansas City, Missouri to get gas because it was 10 cents cheaper a gallon. Gave him something to do, But speaking of initiatives to get people to eat more produce, especially low-income people, we had just a quick press release, but if you didn't read beyond the headline, then you didn't realize that, yes, finally, we're seeing some stuff. Hy-Vee has launched a Healthy You Wellness Tour, and it's like an RV that's got an apple and some weight loss stuff on it, but it's going to travel across the Midwest promoting healthy eating habits and nutrition. And the buried lead on this is that it's actually part of last year's initiatives from the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. So we're starting to see some of these programs go into effect. It's not the only one that's gone into effect, but it was like, oh, hey, yeah, we were supposed to see some follow through on that. So I don't know exactly what you're going to get from an RV tour, but, it'd be interesting.
Well, along those lines, the story on Instacart accepting SNAP online in all 50 states, that was also an initiative that they promised during that White House conference, and they've since followed up on it. So I guess the trend of private companies participating in this and then having deliverables and then delivering, that's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm super enthusiastic about seeing some of that. Although I would like to see, the huge list that we had coming out of that meeting, to see a checkoff, to see what's going on, what's been funded, what's been implemented. So maybe we should take a look at that. I don't know. Just kind of spitballing here.
Well, last year at the Washington conference was the press conference. That was all going on the same week. And when I was there, they actually had the press conference on monitors during outside the conference session. So you could watch some of it. And some of IFPA people were participating in both. So I'm going to that in a couple weeks. So that will be one of the follow-ups that I'll ask about if they're not touting it. So we'll have that for our
Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, I was just going to mention that the Washington conference is coming up, so definitely would be a time to, break out that list and see where we are, and maybe get an update, a checkup, if you will, on the health and wellness initiatives. And I've been busy sports momming for the last couple of weeks. We got the summer sports ending, the fall sports starting, so I have not had a chance to watch anything on TV. But you took some homework and watched
Yes.
Poisoned too.
When we talked about it, I had not seen it yet, but I have since seen it. And my initial impression, I should say, my anticipation was that it was going to be a hit job. And when I watched it, it was actually relatively fair and pretty well done. And their sourcing was excellent. They didn't just talk to grievance groups and people who just slam on any kind of food production. They talked to Frank Giannis. They talked to USDA heads. They talked to, like we said, we knew Tim York was going to get interviewed. Of course, Bill Marler, but it was much more reasonable than I expected. The produce industry did not come out looking great. Well, it's leafy greens, but really, if there was any finger pointing, it was that the industry needs to work with cattle production, because leafy greens, their biggest risk is getting carrot spillover from cattle facilities, and that's how the E. coli is getting into leafy greens. And there needs to be, I mean, basically Mike Taylor, who used to work at FDA, said produce people can't control the cattle industry, and cattle industry doesn't feel like they have any responsibility for produce food safety. So that has to change. Steaks and salads and potatoes go really great together. There's no reason why we can't work together on some of this stuff. So that's where it needs to go. And it, I wanted to hate it. I didn't like it because a lot of the stuff they were saying are really big problems that still need to be addressed.
I like that they're bringing up some of the problems, because I started covering the produce industry in 2005, shortly before the big E. coli problem, right? The spinach E. coli issue. And prior to that, I had no idea what the landscape of America's salad bowl looked like. I thought it was just like field upon field of leafy greens in harmony, like butterflies maybe. I had no idea that cattle ranches were an issue, or even like present. Like, nobody thinks of California as a cattle ranch kind of place. You think of Texas or Nebraska or something like that. So raising awareness of some of the problems that having those two coexist, I think is very helpful for the industry, so people can understand. It's like it's not like the salad growers can pick this dirt up and take it somewhere else, because the reason we grow there is because the ideal conditions. Is there something we can do about the cows that are so close to it? Is it ideal conditions for the cows? I don't know. I'm not a rancher. It would seem like there's got to be some kind of harmony to be had there. And I'm sure that both entities don't want government to step in and make them change what they're doing. Nobody wants that, right? But if
No, none of the participants do, but I would guess that they would have the same argument that the lettuce producers would have, is this is where we need to be this time of year because the conditions are optimal. And we know there's basically two places in our country where, big scale lettuce is grown, and it's Salinas and the Imperial Valley, Yuma area. And, does lettuce have the strength to tell cattle to take a hike? I don't think they do, but
no,
they need to figure out a way to work together.
Yeah, we got to come up with a right-of-way situation here, because there's not a kill step in lettuce, and that's the crux of the matter, is that there's no way to prevent some of these things, no matter how much research we're doing. But they're trying, of course, the Center for Produce Safety, tons and tons of research trying to find ways the solutions for this. But what is it? It's 2023 now. That was in 2007, and we still every fall and every spring start to wonder, when we're going to see if it's going to happen, like, checking the CDC every single day to see if there's any kind of outbreak alerts happening we know exactly what's happening and when it happens usually. So it's interesting to see that they covered it in what sounds like a pretty fair way, which I did not expect Netflix to do. So we'll see if anything comes out of it.
It was
Probably
more
not.
fair than the way they treated the meat and poultry industries. If I was in those industries, I would not have appreciated how that was handled. They did put some blame on consumers because, as we know, a lot of food safety problems are done in people's houses because they're not safe with how they handle products. And then they took some cheap shots on cantaloupes too, which they said you can't wash cantaloupes to make them safe. You actually can. Those are one of the few you can wash with soap and water.
And a brush. Yeah, you got to use a brush to like get that
You
stuff
can
off
do
of there.
that. It makes it safer.
Do people actually do that in their homes?
I do.
You do? Not very many people who are involved in produce and food safety do.
I tell anyone when I see them cutting a cantaloupe, I was like, you wash that with soap and water, right? You know where that's grown?
In the dirt.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for the Produce Reporter Week in Review. If you are not getting the Produce Reporter newsletter, you need to go to producebluebook.com and sign up. Okay.
I wash my watermelons with soap and water too.